Why is it that 50 years later, a fake mechanical shark still makes us hesitate before stepping into the ocean? Because this is not just a story of a shark, it's a story of how one film born from chaos, a broken prop, and a director barely in his 20s changed Hollywood forever. In the summer of 1975, Steven Spielberg's Jaws terrified audiences worldwide. It didn't just scare people out of the water, it pulled them into theaters in numbers nobody had ever seen before. Suddenly, summer wasn't the dumping ground for movies, it was prime time. The word blockbuster was born.
I think Jaws is the greatest movie ever made. Not the greatest film ever made, but what's supposed to be a movie, everything that a movie is supposed to be, Jaws is the pinnacle of that. It's the greatest movie ever made.
But Jaws isn't only about box office records. Its true legacy lives in the stories behind the camera, the production that almost sank, the brilliance hidden inside mistakes, and the countless filmmakers who spent the next 50 years chasing its shadow. Let's dive deep into the making of a legend, how disaster turned into brilliance, how fear became a phenomenon, and how a 30-foot shark still commands the seas of cinema half a century later. Welcome to the story of Jaws, 50 years later.
I turned the film down a couple of times, but it was such an adventure. If you had to pick one word to describe the shoot, it was waiting.
Before it became a cultural phenomenon, before packed theaters and the word blockbuster even existed, it was a disaster waiting to happen.
You're goddamn right.
By all accounts, Jaws should have been a failure, a production cursed by weather, budget overruns, a studio losing faith, and of course that shark that almost never worked.
What did you do with your non-working shark problem?
Well, the first mistake with the shark was they made a big mistake and they built it for fresh water.
What's the difference?
Well, electrolysis is a major problem when you get salt into all the machinery, into the electrical system.
The prop constantly malfunctioned. When placed in salt water, the hydraulics failed. When the head worked, the tail didn't. Spielberg joked that the movie was turning into a silent experimental film about waves and swimmers because the shark never appeared. Spielberg made the bold choice to shoot on the ocean instead of inside a controlled water tank. That meant real waves, drifting boats, cameras ruined by seawater, and a schedule that spiraled from 55 planned days to more than 150. The cast wasn't spared either. Richard Dreyfuss and Robert Shaw, who played Hooper and Quint, famously clashed on and off screen. Shaw's heavy drinking fueled real tension, and Spielberg worried that the fights might sink the production faster than the shark itself. But here's a twist. The chaos forced Spielberg into brilliance. With the shark constantly broken, he leaned on suspense and suggestion. A single fin slicing the surface, a floating barrel, and above all, John Williams' haunting two-note score. The less the audience saw, the more their imagination filled the gaps, and imagination turned out to be far more scarier than any rubber shark. By the time filming finally wrapped, the exhausted crew swore Spielberg would never work again. But instead of sinking his career, this Nightmare at Sea became the film that would launch it into the stratosphere. But a nightmare shoot doesn't always create a masterpiece. Just because the cameras rolled doesn't mean the audience would care. Yet, when the film finally reached theaters, what people saw was not just a product of chaos, but the work of an emerging storyteller who turned all that pressure into something extraordinary. Because Jaws isn't really about a shark at all, it's about people. A small beach town torn between safety and economy, a police chief out of his depth, a grizzled fisherman haunted by his past, and a young scientist desperate to prove himself. These characters give the story its backbone. The shark is simply the force that pushes on their flaws and fears until they break. Spielberg understood something crucial. Horror works best when it's grounded in the ordinary. Like Hitchcock before him, he built terror not with spectacle but with anticipation. The fear didn't come from a rubber shark, it came from suggestion, from wide shots of the ocean, the silence before a splash, and letting the audience imagine what might be just beneath the surface. The camera work reflects this. Underwater point-of-view shots from the shark's perspective were a direct nod to Hitchcock's suspense vocabulary. And beyond Hitchcock, Jaws reached back further into classic adventure storytelling. The second half of the film drifts into Moby Dick territory with Quint as a modern Captain Ahab, obsessed and doomed by his pursuit. Three men aboard the Orca set against the endless ocean, more mythic than monster movie. What kept it from becoming too heavy was Spielberg's instinct for naturalism, the overlapping dialogue, the humor tucked between tense moments, and the small-town realism of Amity Island. These elements grounded the spectacle in something recognizably human, which made the fear all the more contagious. It's no wonder that generations of filmmakers cite Jaws as a turning point, not simply because it scared them, but because it proves something bigger, that even a so-called B-movie premise in the right hands could become cinematic art. But as audiences lined up around the block in the summer of 1975, scholars and critics were quick to notice that Jaws was more than a simple thrill ride. Beneath the surface, it carried layers of meaning. Some saw the shark as a symbol of nature's revenge, a reminder that when humans exploit or control the sea has the power to strike back. Others read it through a political lens, public officials downplaying danger to protect the economy and the tension between public safety and profit. There were even Freudian readings suggesting that the shark represented suppressed primal fears, the lurking violence beneath civilization's calm surface. But beyond academia, the real test was how people felt while watching. And here's the truth, Jaws terrified audiences like nothing before it. People screamed, they laughed nervously, they covered their eyes, and crucially, they came back to experience it again. For weeks after the movie's release, beaches across America reported a noticeable dip in swimmers. The film had done the impossible. It turned a trip to the movies into a matter of survival instincts. That's the brilliance of Jaws. It operates on two levels. For scholars, it's a text bursting with meaning. For audiences, it's pure adrenaline. And somewhere in between, Spielberg discovered the perfect formula for how a movie could both be a cultural artifact and a thrill ride rolled into one. Which brings us to perhaps the greatest legacy of Jaws, the summer blockbuster. Before 1975, summer was considered the graveyard for movies. Studios used the hotter months to quietly release films they had little faith in, assuming audiences would rather be outside than in theaters. But Jaws changed everything. Its wide release strategy, its national marketing push, and its ability to draw repeat viewings created a new kind of spectacle, the summer blockbuster. Suddenly, studios realized that the right film, released at the right time, could dominate theaters for months. Each summer after Jaws became a high-stakes competition for the next big thing. Without it, there's no Star Wars, no Jurassic Park, no Marvel movie opening weekend craze. And yet, Jaws wasn't only about the numbers. Its cultural presence was enormous. Lines at theaters became news stories. Its theme music became a universal shorthand for lurking danger. Its imagery entered the collective imagination in a way few films ever have. For Hollywood, Jaws was the start of a new era. For culture, it was proof that a movie could grip not just audiences but an entire society. Which is why half a century later, the ripples it created still touch every film that comes after. Not as a film, but as a beacon for filmmakers. 50 years on, Jaws isn't simply a relic of the past. It remains alive, swimming through every blockbuster premiere, every filmmaker's memory, every audience shiver when they wade a little too far into the water. That's the true genius of Spielberg's nightmare. Not just a movie, but a movement. If you found this video insightful and are interested in watching more, check out a video on Christopher Nolan's Odyssey right here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.